Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and with us finally starting to see a bit of class tuning at this point in Shadowlands Beta, I wanted to take a bit of time today to talk about some abilities, I guess lack of abilities, and changes that I want to see for Warlocks. Now, obviously, if you've been following the channel or the state of beta, you probably know that Warlocks, and this is not even my bias here, are the best DPS spec in Shadowlands right now, and I don't think it's very close. Destruction is very good. Affliction is probably the best spec out of any DPS spec at this point. However, that's due to a bit of changes. Malefic Rapture, mastery scaling, things like that. Even putting that aside, though, there are a handful of abilities and things that we've mentioned in the past that have issues and we'd like to see changed or resolved. And seeing as how we're getting pretty far into beta, I wanted to draw some attention to this and also get y'all's opinion on these topics. Now, a quick shameless plug here. All my week auras, profiles, add-ons that you might see here in this video are available to you for free on my Twitch if you want to swing by and grab them anytime. Be sure to let me know what you guys think of these, I guess, suggested changes and things that I want to see in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Let's get right into this and talk about, I guess, some wanted changes for Warlocks. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about here is a part of Destruction. Now, last week they made some changes to Roaring Blaze, basically changing the tooltip from saying it affects your fire spells to just actually naming off each individual spell that it affects. One of the biggest points of, I guess, one of the biggest issues with Roaring Blaze has been that technically Chaos Bolt is a fire spell. The same with Cataclysm and Shadow Flame, Shadow Burn, because it's Shadow Flame damage or Chaos damage, which counts as a fire ability. However, that was not affected by Roaring Blaze. So Blizzard sort of did a workaround in a sense, just quite literally changing it, removing the fire spell clause, and making it so that if you select fire spells, they'll be added to this. You can see conflict rate increases your soul fire, channel demon fire damage, all that. If I remove these two, it just goes to immolate, incinerate, and conflict. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out here, this might be an oversight. It might just not be, it might be a tooltip error. It is not affecting internal combustion. Internal combustion, it consumes immolate damage. Yes, your Chaos Bolt consumes that damage, but when you look at your damage breakdown on retail, you'll see that it's immolate and internal combustion is separate, and internal combustion is fire damage. So I don't know if that's an oversight on their part, or they don't want Chaos Bolt affecting internal combustion for a certain reason. I'm sorry, Roaring Blaze affecting internal combustion for a certain reason. At this point in time, it doesn't really matter because internal combustion is actual garbage when you don't have any haste. I believe it deals like 3 to 4% of our damage, single target wise, in beta. But it's still something that I wanted to bring up and point out, whether it's an oversight or not. This could be an issue later on. But if it is buffed by Roaring Blaze, that also changes a good bit because there are a handful of conduits that also work with internal combustion's damage amp. So the second actual ability or interaction here, I guess the lack thereof interaction-wise, that I wanted to point out revolves around Demonology. Now, this has been something that I've given feedback on in my Warlock Google Doc feedback post for a long time. It's been there since basically day one of alpha, and that is that with the changes to demonic consumption, it makes you want to have your Grimoire Felguard as a 1.5 CD so much more even compared to now. On live right now, demonic consumption is all based around how many imps you can get out and how high you can keep their energy, LOSing them, all that before they start expiring, and you build the biggest tyrant you possibly can. The changes to consumption basically make it so that this is like Thalkaos consumption from Legion, baked into your demonic tyrant. I like the change overall because it makes pets outside of your imps, your Dreadstalkers, your Vile Fiend, your Felguard, even your actual main pet Felguard relevant, because it siphons their health and increases your tyrant's damage. Now, the issue here is that Grimoire Felguard is a 2-minute CD, and your tyrant is a 1.5 minutes. Even playing the Wilfred's Legendary, it's undertuned right now, and it gets it to about a 1:18 cooldown. This needs to be a 1.5 minutes. This is probably one of the biggest issues I feel with Demonology talent-wise when it comes to playing the, I guess, the optimal build. And I guess that's still sort of, to be determined. But this was initially a 1.5 minute cooldown in BFA. It was nerfed to a 2-minute cooldown with less than 48 hours before Battle for Azeroth went live. Not alpha to beta, before it went live worldwide. And it's been this way ever since then. Now, there have been some damage modifiers, amps to it and all that, but you can see when you actually end up opening up here, and I'll open up briefly, you get a lot of value because you can cast your dogs, your Grimoire Felguard, your Vile Fiend. You can, get X amount of imps in depending how long you have. We'll just do a 3-shard Hand of Gold in here and go into your Tyrant. But the issue is, outside of that, when your Tyrant's coming back around in about a 1.5 minutes, your Grimoire Felguard is not. And Your Grimoire Felguard is it has a substantial amount of health. It has 20,000 health, I believe, right around there, 20k. I have 2 Felguards in here, but regardless, 20k compared to, you know, actual like Dreadstalkers having, I don't know, a lot less. Imps have what, 4,000? Dreadstalkers have about 18k, I believe. It's a substantial amount of health, and seeing as how your Demonic Tyrant's actual damage is based off of siphoning health from your pets, this just needs to be a thing. Demonology's damage profile, having a 1.5-minute Tyrant is unique. Not many classes have a powerful CD on that short of a cooldown, but the issue is, depending on tuning and things, chances are high you might just want to hold for your Grimoire Felguard anyways. So I think that is a very subtle change they could make. They could probably approach it in one of 2 ways. One being they nerf the actual damage Grimoire Felguard does, which seems like the, you know, optimal, easy choice. Number 2, they could technically just nerf the health that your Grimoire Felguard has, because the damage it deals is impressive, but it's not overbearing. What you really want it for here is the Tyrant extension and the health siphon that you get from the Grimoire Felguard. So there's 2 ways I feel they could approach that. I do not want them to mess with the actual like duration, how long it's out for, because that sort of messes with like min-maxing pet summons and all that before casting your Tyrant. But I feel this change would be a massive, massive quality of life change for Demonology, and I hope that it happens. Now, the third change that we'll talk about here also revolves around Demonology, more around Ritual of Doom, which is the ability that everyone's been asking for a long time, or been at least inquiring about it on stream and in videos and things like that. It was mentioned at BlizzCon that this ability would indeed be returning in Shadowlands, and then we didn't really hear anything about it until last build, where it just reappeared. Now, the issue with Ritual of Doom here is that it's on a 1-hour cooldown, and obviously that presents a lot of issues, because number one, these are summonable, yeah, in raiding and Mythic Plus. Now, in the last little bout of raid testing we had, the actual Doom Guards weren't attacking the bosses. However, I've heard mixed reports on that. Giving Warlocks a semi-strong 1-hour cooldown in Summon Doomguard could pose some issues. People might not think that's impactful, but when your raid has 3 to 4 Warlocks, and there's an ability, depending on, you know, raid comp, and there's an ability they have once an hour that gives them, that counts as about 5% of their overall damage, that's impactful. Now, it's sort of similar to how Decimating Bolt is for Affliction and Destruction. Decimating Bolt works well with App and Destro because it affects Drain Soul. Drain Soul has legendary powers and things like that. It interacts with talents. The same for Destro with Fire and Brimstone, the damage amp you have there, and how it fuels Rain of Chaos, Rain of Fire, all of that. Ritual of Doom has a an interaction with Demonology. The Doomguard you summon counts towards demonic consumption. Demonic consumption, when you summon your Tyrant, will siphon health from your Doomguard. Now, I remember the Doomguard's health pool not being incredibly big. I think it's around like another Felguard, which is solid, to be fair. It's like it's massive, but it's still something. It's bringing that damage amp to demonic consumption, as well as having the extra Doomguard damage every hour or so. Now, like I said, in testing last week, things were a bit buggy. Doomguards were persisting through death and all of that, but the issue is, when it comes to tuning things, certain patchwork bosses, I think people are probably underestimating a bit how impactful this could be. If, you know, Warlocks or any class has a strong 1-hour cooldown, every hour you can have a, you know, 5% damage amp to your damage across the board, every single Warlock. That's pretty massive. So what I would, as much as I like the ability returning flavor-wise, and it also has some other issues here and there with, you know, tuning and stuff like that, I'd like to see this just not work in raiding in Mythic Plus. I know it's a bit controversial, but it's just the truth. The fact of the matter is, nobody wants to be summoning 5-6 Doomguards every hour. We'll do it if it's DPS gain, but it just promotes a lot of, I don't want to say degenerate, maybe gameplay in a sense. It just doesn't feel like it should be a part of raiding and Mythic Plus. I don't like having a portion of my damage tied to a 1-hour cooldown, and also having it break mid-combat is gonna suck, even though it'd be really awesome. Like it also happened. It happened to me in raid testing last week. It was great on pull. It broke on me and turned on me, and well, it died. But yeah, I just don't feel that Ritual of Doom has a place in raiding and Mythic Plus. I could be wrong here, but for the most part, I think it would just be better if it was a thing you could do in the real world. The outside world, you know, go terrorize Goldshire, but for the most part, leave it out of raiding and Mythic Plus. Okay, so the next issue here is one that we've also talked about a good bit in the feedback document, and really for almost the entire course of Battle for Azeroth to the same extent. And that is Demonology and its lack of an interrupt, and the current, I guess, iteration of Axe Toss. Now, technically, Demonology was given an interrupt with Axe Toss a few months ago in an alpha build early on. The issue is it's not really an interrupt. So what we have here, it says the Felguard hurls its weapon, stunning or interrupting the target for 4 seconds. The issue is, it's deeper than that. It will only interrupt a mob if it is stun immune. Meaning, there are some mobs, like, I've given examples before, like the Assassins in Motherload currently in BFA, with their Toxic Blades cast. You can stun them, even though that cast is uninterruptible, and it will interrupt the cast, and they won't recast it. Then there are mobs like Sky Screamers and its Haldazar, where you can Axe Toss that terrifying Screech or whatever they do, but once that stun's over, they're going to recast it. They need a hard interrupt to do that. And the issue is, with this current form of Axe Toss, it will not do that. So once again, the thing is, you can interrupt bosses, and bosses do need to be interrupted, but you need that reliable interrupt every time. You can't have a group with, a demo lock, for example. If Demonology is great, it's pretty good in BFA right now, but the issue is you lack utility. You have to have that reliable interrupt, that reliable utility, and this current form of Axe Toss does not bring that. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. It also has travel time. Throw the axe. Now it hits. The travel time thing can be fixed pretty easily. It's very similar to... It can be fixed pretty easily. Basically, they could just do what they did with imps spawning out of Panda cooldown like this. They just spawn much faster. They can make the axe travel a lot faster. But what Axe Toss needs, all it needs to do is interrupt or check for a spell being cast before it stuns. If the mob is casting a spell that's interruptible and you Axe Toss it, it interrupts. Done. If it's not casting a spell, it's interruptible, or it's casting a spell, it's uninterruptible, like Toxic Blades, it stuns. That's great. In the end, I don't like having Axe Toss be our interrupt. I thought it was always a clunky, sort of just, I don't want to say lazy, but just sort of a lazy workaround for giving Demo an interrupt. I think just going Grimoire Felguard or Grimoire Felhunter out of the spellbook, drag out of your PvP talents, and dragging it onto your bars here, that's the perfect interrupt. It fits the toolkit very well. It does everything we need it to, even on a shorter cooldown, 24 versus 30, no travel time, and it keeps that utility, that single target stun that Axe Toss is. That's a demo specific thing. So even though this hasn't been touched on a whole lot lately with other issues arising, Axe Toss still needs to be changed if they want to keep it as an interrupt. Make it interrupt before it stuns, but in the end, what I really would like to see is call Felhunter baseline for Demonology Warlocks. So the next issue I want to talk about here actually gets back to Affliction, and it's actually based around a legendary we have. This is the Malefic Wrath legendary effect. Malefic Rapture increases the damage of your Drain Soul by 25% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Now I'll show you here briefly. First of all, this is bugged, by the way. Get a dot up, cast out Rapture. I have a weak aura that tracks this. Watch. It goes right to 2 stacks, so 2 and 3. It's bugged, obviously it'll be 1, but for simplicity's sake, I wanted to show you that before we got into the video, before this segment of the video. So what I'm getting at here is that the duration on this effect is not incredibly long. 8 seconds is not a long time, and when this is not a difficult thing to do, it's just when you have so many abilities to juggle, meaning Shadow's Embrace, Haunt, Siphon Life, Singularity, Dark Soul, Dark Glare, Rapture, Decimating Bolt, Vile Taint if you're playing it, maintaining Shadow's Embrace. If you're playing Soul Rot, you have Drain Lives to cast, your Unstable Affliction dot. You just have a lot of things to juggle when it comes to the single target build of Affliction. And the rotation I've been following has been pretty much precast your Haunt. No, don't do that. Precast your Haunt like normal, no pet out, it's fine. Precast your Haunt into Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, all Dark Soul, Zerking, Singularity, UA, Dark Glare, and I'll actually drain here to get my Shadow's Embrace stacks up to 3. Then I'll go Decimating Bolt and Rapture. 1, 2, 3, because it's bug, refresh, Haunt, and drain. We want 3 full drains here. So that's 1 drain. I'll Rapture again because it's falling. Drain, but our dots are already falling here. And the thing is, like, I want to Rapture again, but I can't. I don't have any dots up. So you're having to, like, at times, depending on your haste levels, you're having to stop your drains to either, or just cut them short, to refresh your Malefic Rapture legendary effect, or to refresh your dots. Now, there is another way to approach it, and that's precasting the Decimating Bolt. but you don't have the Shadow's Embrace damage amp on the very first buffed Drain Soul cast that you cast from Decimating Bolt. And the thing is, we have a conduit that increases Shadow's Embrace effectiveness by, I think, 65% at max rank. It's very impactful, and it will make a large difference in the drain. So with that sequencing, I would like to see an actual increase to the duration of this effect. 8 seconds is not a long time. An average drain cast is what? 4.6 seconds? That means you can literally get in one drain at the Rapture again. And at the same time, you're half willing to pull shards for your next Singularity when it comes up to dump those Raptures again. It gives Aff a 45-ish second burst window, which is incredibly strong and very impactful. But I would like to see the duration of this effect probably extended to like 12 seconds. It would probably bring with it some kind of damage amplification nerf, but in the long run, chances are high it would probably be a DPS gain, or we'd break even, depending on tuning, because you have Drain Souls affected longer. Even outside of your Decimating Bolt damage amp, it's still strong. And this effect, with Decimating Bolt in execute range on Drain Soul, you've got a 380% damage amp off Decimating Bolt, 100 off Drain Soul, and 75 here. It's incredible. I just wish there's a bit more leeway to play with when it comes to the Malefic Wrath effect, and hopefully that's taken into consideration. So when it comes to our talents, we are playing Affliction here, but this goes for Destruction as well. There are a handful that, for the most part, haven't been incredibly impactful over the course of BFA. We can safely say that those talents like Fire and Brimstone, Inferno, even like Viletate and things, which have picked up a lot towards the end of BFA, are indeed a lot more impactful, rather than Agony, a good example. Changes to Nightfall, ID is here, which is great. I love seeing some variance and variety when it comes to talent choices in Mythic Plus, rating, different scenarios alike. There's an issue here for Affliction and Destruction. It's been an issue for a while, and it feels really bad. It's been left to just rot. That is Grimoire of Sacrifice. So, the issue with Grimoire, I believe it was buffed early on in an alpha build. It might have been the first one. But the issue with Grimoire of Sacrifice is that it doesn't scale with multiple targets. Here is an actual 1 minute, I guess you can say, cycle. This is on the 4 dummies in Grimoire. I was playing Absolute Corruption. I was I was just dinking around, but for the most part, we were following an AoE rotation of sorts. Sacrifice, dealing 7.1% of our damage at 16.1k. Now, the percentage here is not really relevant because we have 4 targets, so Corruption damage is going to be inflated. Rapture damage is going to be inflated. Other effects, Vile Taint, Agony. Just keep in mind, this is over the course of a minute. Grimoire of Sacrifice dealing 16.1k damage. This is a single target pull with Grimoire of Sacrifice over a minute. It dealt 16.5k. It dealt more damage on one target over the course of a minute due to RNG and things. I guess probably also having Haunt here as well. No, never mind. Either way, single targets, AoE. It's late, whatever. But it dealt more damage single target-wise over the course of a minute than it did on 4 targets at once, sustained cleave-wise. That's one of the first issues. Sacrifice does not scale with multiple targets. I hope that it gets the treatment that Nightfall did, meaning the actual proc effect scales when you have more corruptions rolling, more targets, more sacrifice procs. Number 2, what they could do is just straight up remove the weird damage proc this thing has on it and just make it a flat intellect increase or damage increase or something along those lines. Because let's be real, I know that for the most part we're Warlocks and we have pets, but Grimoire of Sacrifice is one of those iconic abilities. It's been around since Classic, Burning Crusade, and it's just unfortunate to see the state that it's been in for the past, 5 years. I'd love to see Sacrifice reverted or changed into something a bit more relevant, and either of those, I think, are a good step in the right direction. And so I figured, while we were sort of on the topic of subpar talents, you can probably figure out what I'm going at here. Sow the Seeds is something that really needs to be looked at, addressed, and probably changed for Affliction. Sow the Seeds has been changed in Shadowlands to now implant 3 seeds total. You can watch 3 come out right here. 1, 2, 3, there you go, and they all pop at once. Now, I guess currently on live in BFA, you get a total of 2 seeds with Sow the Seeds. It gives 1 additional enemy, 1 additional seed on nearby targets. It's 3 now. But what I'm getting at is, comparatively this to Malefic Rapture, the damage is just not where it needs to be. Rapture is our main soul shard spender. It deals a tremendous amount of damage, and we're going to talk about that in a minute here as well, because it was buffed about 2 weeks ago. They made it so that Rapture now scales with our Mastery, which it didn't before, and that was really the only separating factor, meaning okay, well, Sow the Seeds could be more impactful at a certain point, because it scales with mastery. But now that the fact that they share the same mastery damage amp, Sow the Seeds is once I feel, again, effectively a dead talent. Yes, every once in a while you'll have a mob jump out of the pack, so having 2 or 3 seed effects is impactful. It can put corruption on everything. It's always annoying when that one mob you're putting a seed on jumps out of the pack and it explodes with nothing around it. However, that's not worth taking Sow the Seeds for. The damage amp is just not it's not as impactful as Rapture, and when it's on the same row as Singularity, which might not apply a dot to every target, but cleaves onto them and costs no soul shard, or Vile Taint, the cost of shard, but applies a dot to every single mob, thus increasing Rapture's damage across the board in AoE, Mythic Plus, and also putting a dot on those mobs. I just don't see how it can compete. It doesn't do anything. All it does is just give you 2 extra seeds, which is a bit more damage, but like you're losing the dot damage amp from Rapture on Vile Taint. You're losing the damage effect. You're losing the slow. You're losing, even Singularity damage cleave. So I talked about this in my Wowhead article that I put up probably a month or so ago, around there. My idea for Sow the Seeds, and this is probably a bit controversial, I'm actually interested to see what you guys want to do with it, so be sure to drop that in the comment section below, is have Seed of Corruption, have Sow the Seeds, amplify or alter Seed of Corruption to apply Agony as well as Corruption whenever it breaks on all the targets that it hits. It's sort of similar to how a Shadow Priest Misery is, but this is more AoE based. Now, that does sort of seem a bit OP, and in a certain sense, depending on how you look at it. You can play Wrath and Agony and just have it refresh both at the same time, or it is AC. But the thing is, Agony has to ramp up damage-wise, and on large pulls, look at the first pull in Freehold, for example. You just don't have time to apply Agony to all those mobs, which means less dots, less I-beam damage from I-beam damage from your Dark Lair, everything else. You can put Vile Taint on them though, and fuel more Raptures, or fuel more, I have that, just more of that raw AoE rolling, but I think this is a pretty even trade-off. You wouldn't get the extra dot from Vile Taint, you wouldn't get the damage amp from Vile Taint, or the extra damage, and you wouldn't get the slow, but let's be real, we already have a Corruption slow effect on one of our legendaries here. I think this is a pretty fair trade-off as a whole. Whether the damage ends up being better or worse, having the ability to apply Agony and Corruption to every mob hit really helps improve AF's just setup time, Mythic Plus, ramp up time, everything, and I think just makes it even more of a contender than it already is in Plus. That's my proposed change for Sow the Seeds. Be sure to let me know what you guys think of it. Now, when it comes to this ability, I don't really have the actual ability to show you, because they recently, I believe, disabled level 60 pre-made character copy, or creation, on the new level 60 Torghast realm they put up. So I can't really go and just straight up choose the Venthyr Covenant, but this is a bit of an important, point to bring up. So the 4 abilities we have here: Scouring Tithe, Soul Rot, and Impending Catastrophe. These 3 are all dot-based abilities. Decimating Bolt is a damage amp to your Drain Soul, your Incinerate, your Shadow Bolt. Believe me, we know what that is. This is the best Covenant right now, for the most part. But Scouring Tithe and Soul Rot, both of these dot effects are extended by your Dark Lair cast. Impending Catastrophe's dot effect, however, is not. Now, this AoE-based ability, in comparison to Soul Rot's ability, everything else deals more damage. It also brings the curse application to a million things. It's impactful. I wanted to point out, though, maybe this is an oversight on Blizzard's part, or maybe this is intended. The actual dot part, not the curse, because curses don't really matter extension-wise, the actual dot portion of Impending Catastrophe's damage is not being extended by our Dark Lair. Now, that dot does count towards Malefic Rapture's dot count, so it fuels bigger Raptures, cast more damage, and it very well could be intended, because, like we said, Soul Rot's dot is impactful, but a lot of it is there for the AoE Drain Life and Scouring Tithe in single target, so it makes sense as to why these 2 are extendable. The other thing with Impending Catastrophe, in addition to it not being affected by our Dark Lair dot extension, is that, I've mentioned this before in the past a lot, Impending Catastrophe brings a lot of utility by applying Curse of Weakness or Recklessness, Tongues, Weakness or Tongues, to targets that it explodes on, essentially. And it has a 1-minute cooldown, meaning Mythic Plus, you should have this every other pack or so. It's big. The problem with Impending Catastrophe is that the curses it puts up, they don't smart curse. I've seen it put Tongues on melee mobs. I've seen it put weakness on casters. I watched it put Curse of Weakness on a mob mid greater heal cast. So I don't know how in-depth that would be to make Impending Catastrophe smart curse mobs that it hits, but if it did, it would actually be pretty impactful, and it would make a difference in Mythic Plus. And if they also made it so that the dot is extended by your Dark Lair, it'd make it even more, I guess, a larger contender when it comes to, you know, Decimating Bolt or whatever we end up going with in Mythic Plus. Those two subtle changes could make a large difference to how impactful Impending Catastrophe is and what we end up choosing as far as our Covenant goes, depending on what type of PvE you're looking at doing on your Warlock. And that finally brings me to my final point that I want to talk about here, which is Malefic Rapture. Now, I mentioned a minute or two ago here that Malefic Rapture was indeed buffed, I believe about 2 weeks ago at this point, to now be affected by our mastery. The thing is, Rapture is already our main single target soul shard spender, and taking into consideration the fact that, I mean, it's both an AoE and single target spender, it deals a lot of damage, and being affected by mastery means it's even more impactful. And plus, than it was before. It deals a tremendous amount of damage when it comes to AoE. Now, the thing is, I don't expect Rapture to stay as overpowered as it is. Now, this is just a basic opener here, but you can see it's a pretty decent part of our damage, depending on how your Drain Soul set up with Decimating Bolt and all of that. If they're going to nerf Malefic Rapture, I want them to just nerf the baseline damage that it deals per dot. Now, it's sort of hard to see here because the tooltip doesn't separate, you know, 300 damage per dot plus 228 from your mastery damage amp or whatever it is, but I think it's a pretty good way to approach it. Just nerf the damage that Rapture deals per dot on the target or targets mobs that you're attacking. I don't want to see it target capped. I don't want to see anything like that. It's a very simple fix, and with it scaling with mastery, it's not that hard to tune later on. You can just turn the dial back or forward back on the baseline dot damage that it deals, excluding mastery, before you even get to that damage amp. It's a pretty simple change, but I don't want to see any kind of weird target capping or a change to things as a whole. What I do want to see, however, and this sort of ties into Rapture, is that if they nerf Rapture, I wouldn't hate seeing a buff to Agony and Corruption's damage. This is an opener we had here, and so I-beam damage is a bit inflated, Singularity damage is a bit inflated, but as a whole, Agony, Corruption, and Siphon Life deal about 5% each or so of our damage, which as a dot class feels pretty bad. I know that in the long run, it's hard to tune dot classes because of Mythic Plus, I guess, in a sense. Council fights, Cleave fights, and Council Nathria does look like a very good Warlock dot-based here. Aff looks to be the best spec in the raid so far, and I don't think it's very close out of every class. But it feels bad when your two main dots, I guess 2 or 3, depending what you're doing, are dealing 5-6% of your damage. I like Rapture as a spender. I like what it does in Plus, I like what it does in single target, but I really would like to see our dots, our Agony, our Corruption, our Siphon Life deal more damage as a whole. Thanks for watching, though, guys. Like I said, we're getting into the later stages of Shadowlands Beta. Tuning has started for a lot of classes. Last week, and even the week before, a bit in a sense, we saw some subtle changes, and listen, Warlock's pretty good. I imagine we're probably going to get nerfed to a certain extent, but the thing is, even with nerfs to Decimating Bolt or whatever we might get, we're still pretty good. Castle Nathria still looks like a very, very good Warlock raid tier. All I'm hoping for, well, I'm hoping for the changes in this video, obviously, but what I'm really hoping for is if they do tuning, all the tuning is done and complete by the time the game goes live. I don't want to be swapping covenants or random specs here and there in the middle of Castle Nathria Prague. Let me know what you guys think of this video in the comment section below. I've been meaning to make it for a couple weeks now, but I wanted to wait until tuning started, and now that it has, I think it's a good time to put this out and actually open up this discussion to you guys as well. We will be updating the Google feedback doc probably within a week or so, so I wanted to, get this video out there and get y'all's opinions and thoughts. So, once again, all Malikora's profiles add-ons you've seen here are available to you for free on my Twitch. Feel free to swing by anytime, drop a follow, grab them, hang out, ask any questions you might have. If you guys enjoyed the content, feel free to smash the subscribe button below, or if you want to see more WoW content in general, smash that sub button below. Helps out a lot, guys. Thanks again, and I will see you all soon, again, on stream. Peace.